This project has its origins about 2 years ago, when Miguel and I met and we decided to put in an application to what's called NESTA in the UK, which is the National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts, for a proposal to see if we could develop natural language processing tools to assist in deliberative democratic processes. And what we're going to present today is the work that's come out of that project and subsequently developed further. So Miguel and Jonathan are also members of the team, along with Felix. So I'll just give an overview. We're going to look at the background of issues relating to the promotion of direct democracy and some of the challenges that have been identified and how we think we might fix them. We'll have a case study, and then we'll evaluate what we've developed so far to give you a sense of what progress we've made. We have some follow-on studies that are ongoing, which are looking to take the work further, and we'll conclude with some final comments and invite your questions, essentially. So Felix, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rob. So let me perhaps start with giving you a little bit of a background of why we think that this is an important topic at the moment. The key reason why policymakers and researchers are increasingly looking at citizen participation tools at the moment is that the political environment in which our democratic institutions were first built has changed quite dramatically. So first of all, what we observe is that there's a growing gap and decline of trust between citizens and governments. There are numerous reports that congruently find steadily declining rates of satisfaction with democracy. There's a recent study done by the Bennett Institute in Cambridge, for example, that shows that today more than half of the population in developed countries are dissatisfied with democratic institutions. And countries like the US, the UK, and Brazil show the highest ever recorded levels of democratic dissatisfaction. And at the same time, we are witnessing unprecedented levels of political mobilization. So 2019, just before the pandemic, the world saw mass protests all over the globe, in democracies and in authoritarian regimes, in poor and in wealthy countries. And so these and scientists tend to kind of talk about this year 2019 as the year of the protests, and started to analyze what was happening there. And although all of these protests have different local triggers and led to different outcomes, many of these movements have been leaderless, and in the eyes of a growing number of analysts and academics, they represent a broader crisis of agency and of representation, if you will. So people don't feel properly represented anymore. And it seems as if traditional democratic institutions, such as political parties, trade unions, or parliaments, are struggling with the increasing complexity of societies in the digital era, and fail to function as filters and aggregators of public opinion. Not failing, perhaps, but they're struggling with that role. And collective action that we see in protests like that is increasingly individualized, dynamic, and single issue driven. And it seems as if our institutions aren't really prepared anymore to channel this type of political input. And another factor is that the exponential growth of internet penetration means that there's more and more information available to everyone. And so this means that there's an unprecedented level of scrutiny of political actors, but also raise expectations about what governments are supposed to do and how they should operate, and how social public services are to be provided. So there's an increased demand for accountability, transparency, and more effective policies. Next slide, please, Rob. Thank you. So in the light of this context, governments are increasingly experimenting with different forms of citizen participation, ranging from small-scale face-to-face deliberative assemblies to large-scale mass participation processes. We can talk about the different forms of participation perhaps in the discussion, but in this particular case study, we are focusing on what we call digital mass participation. And the underlying premise of digital mass participation is that public decision-making can be improved by tapping into the collective intelligence of citizens, or what is sometimes called the wisdom of the crowds. And put simply, the theory posits that the aggregation of individual knowledge and opinions from large groups results in decisions that are often better than those made by any single member of this group, or indeed a group of experts. Anyone who is interested in this and how it relates to public decision making or a public political system should look at the book of Landemore and John Elster on collective wisdom. And now, in what sense, though, could mass participation make law-making processes better? Aitamoto and Chen distinguish three distinct values that we can attribute to these kind of processes. And so the first value is epistemic. Systematic citizens can provide policymakers with broader, more diverse, and complete knowledge that is possible through expert sourcing or through public hearings, say, and questionnaires. And at the same time, such participation also promotes peer learning, as users of the platform will be confronted with and deliberate a range of different arguments and views. For example, a study of a citizen-driven Finnish road traffic law showed that such processes can lead to laws that are less biased, more independent, and more accurate than those drafted by experts. Now, the fact that citizens are involved also produces democratic value, as mass participation can improve the inclusiveness, transparency, and accountability of law and policymaking. And this produces better buy-in from citizens, as they will be better informed about reform processes. And in some areas, citizen participation can also lead to the centralization of decision-making when we look, for instance, at cases where citizens are given control over part of the budget of their local authority. And finally, mass participation can also foster economic value. And this is because, given the access to larger and more complete pool of knowledge and the inclusiveness of digital mass participation processes, policies and laws can be more effectively tailored around the people's needs, resulting in more effective policies that enjoy wider social support. So if implemented effectively, such tools may be one way of addressing deteriorating trust and disillusion among the public with formal political institutions and parties. And in particular, online participation may prove a valuable tool for channeling increasingly individualized, ad hoc and single issue driven political activism, which our institutions find difficult to absorb at the moment. And next slide, please, Rob. Now, against this very promising theoretical background, and with a growing availability of new digital technologies, governments are increasingly inviting growing numbers of citizens to participate in policy making at different levels, ranging from participatory budgeting at the local level and local and national lawmaking to constitution making. And now, while the high participation numbers are important for the effectiveness of digital mass participation, the increased scale and complexity of citizen input can easily overwhelm both citizens and policymakers. Effectively, digital mass participation creates too much noise to make sense, for us to make sense of citizen input. And this was the case in constitution-making processes in Chile and Ireland, but e-democracy platforms across the board have found have been found to face very similar problems, where too much citizen input and duplicate submissions meant that political action and collaboration could not be properly coordinated. And so in more technical terms, this is what we refer to as information overload. And information overload affects participating citizens, as citizens find it difficult to follow debates and processes, which significantly limits the exchange of ideas, the coordination of political action and collaboration, and basically makes deliberation meaningless or impossible. Information overload then also affects policymakers, because policymakers won't be expecting to receive any meaningful information, and will develop dismissive attitudes towards the information they receive. And so even where there's high quality citizen input, policymakers don't really have the means to make sense of it and respond to the citizens' contributions. And so this not only obliterates the intended democratic, epistemic, and economic values of mass participation, but it also risks to reinforce the crisis of legitimacy of democratic institutions, as participation then remains trivial without any meaningful impact on policy outcomes, which then leads to cynicism, frustration, and apathy among citizens. So the key challenge of this project was how to address this problem and to find ways to overcome information overload. I hope this sets the context nicely and for Rob to take on from now.
I think actually it's Miguel.
Oh, it's Miguel.
Perfect. So if you can stop sharing the screen, Rob, so I will share mine.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so I hope you can see my slide now. So the case study, I'm going to present the case study that we analyzed in this project. The case study focused on this platform, the Console platform. This is a digital platform for participation, a free software platform, meaning that any government, any public institution of the world, even also private companies or individuals can just take it and use it for free and change it as they want. So it's a public technology. And this is the largest public participation platform that exists in the world. There are more than 100 governments that are using or are about to use this platform, mainly local governments, but in some cases also regional and national governments. And it presents a very good case for studying the information overload that was Felix was referring. In particular, this platform can allow for a lot of different participation processes. So for example, this is something that can be done in this platform, debates. People can open debates and talk about things they're interested in and debate on what they consider the relevant issues. There's a space for proposals. People can send specific ideas on how to improve the cities, the countries, the regions, and people can pre-select the important ones, supporting the ones that they consider more relevant. People can vote on different issues, for example, a redevelopment of a square in a city or a public space. People can also participate directly on regulation and legislation processes. So here we have an example where a government published a proposed regulation, and then people can comment on specific parts on how to improve it. Or participatory budgeting. This is becoming a very common process for public participation, where part of the budget of the institution is publicly available for the people decision. So people can send ideas, select the most interesting ones, and then this is what is done with the budget. In our case study, we focus on the citizen proposals, where people can basically send ideas, both the ones that they consider more interesting, and the top ones are the ones selected usually to be carried out by the government. And we focus on a particular case, the case of the Madrid city, that is one of the cities using this platform. It's a very successful case. There are more than 500,000 users, and in total, in this specific proposal scenario, they collected more than 20,000 proposals. So this is the moment where this situation of information overload starts appearing. Obviously, nobody, not the user, but also not the civil servants in the government, are able to go through all these proposals and really understand where the interesting one, the high quality ideas, and split them from the others. This is how the platform looks in the proposal. So this is an example of a proposal. There's a title of proposal, the person who made the proposal, some text, and here's where people can support any of the ideas. And then also there is below the proposal, there is some tags, some categories. The author of the proposal can propose some general categories for the proposal. There's a space for related content. When two proposals are similar, anybody can select them as similar or related proposals. And there's also a space for comments where people can debate around the proposal. So what we studied is how can we improve all these interactions between users and this part of the platform using machine learning, using what's called generally artificial intelligence, to make it a bit more efficient and easier to use. In particular, we propose to study 4 different aspects. First, the users, how we can connect users with each other so they can work together, the users who have similar interests. How can we automatically define all these categories so it's not the author who is defining the tags, but it's the platform automatically who organize all the proposals? How can we relate the proposals so similar proposals are automatically shown as related? And how can we summarize comments? So you don't need to read hundreds or thousands of comments, but you can read just a brief summary of what people are saying. So these are the 4 objectives that we analyze, and these are the techniques that we apply to try to solve or improve the situation. So we'll go briefly one by one, explain them. So first, around defining the categories and relating the proposals, we are working with this part of the platform, basically the text of the proposal, the title and the text of the proposal. And we use a technique that is called topic modeling, in general terms, that the idea is to try to organize all the proposals in different topics, in a small set of topics that is well organized. Basically, what we did first is to idea of cleaning the data. Cleaning the data. So basically, we look at this proposal, but we try to focus on the relevant words on the proposal. So that, for example, the nouns of the proposal, the words that contain more content, like, for example, in this proposal, cycle lanes or traffic or roadway, for example. And then look at what are the most relevant words inside the proposal. So look at the frequency of the words to see which ones appear to be more relevant to define the content of the proposals. And once we are focusing on these relevant words, to define the topics. We are using a specific technique that is called matrix factorization that basically allow us to take all the relevant words from all the proposal, this 20,000 proposal, and organize them in just a small group, a small set of categories. In particular, for example, in this case, in the city of Madrid, we define 40 categories, 40 topics, where basically all the proposal can be organized. So all the proposal belong to any of these topics or to a combination of these topics. These are the topics that contain the most relevant words from all proposals. These topics are also defined by some words. So here I'm showing in the left the 5 most relevant words for each topic. So for example, the topic number 5, the words that define the topic are underground, line, bus. So this is one of the topics. Topic number 7, resident, car, parking. Topic number 9, pet, animal, owner, cat. So these are the most relevant words for each of the topics. And if we now look on the right side to the proposals belonging to these topics, for example, we see that some proposals belonging to this topic 5 have to do with this underground, bicycles, and so on. The topic 7 have to do with parkings. Topic 9 have to do with animals. So automatically, just looking at these relevant words on each proposal and the words of these topics, we are able to categorize all the proposals. So now the proposals are well organized in this topics only defined by the content. So nobody select the topics or the ideas. We just look at the content and produce the categories. We can also, here on the right side, we can see which proposals are related. Now, since we see how the proposals belong to each of the topics, we can see the proposals that belong to the same topic, or when one proposal is a combination of two topics, which proposal are also like a similar combination. So for example, here we can see a proposal that is about banning advertisement, and similar proposals, title of other proposals that also are talking about the same subject, about advertisements, car, and so on. Or here another talking about the traffic in the city, and the same similar proposal talking about traffic. So now we can not only categorize the proposal, but show for each proposal a list of similar ones. So these are the first two ideas that we try to solve: define categories and relate proposal with this topic modeling technique. Then the next idea was to connect users, people who may have similar interests and may be working together to have more intelligent and better design ideas. First, we analyze how usually people interact together, if they really usually, for example, comment together in the same proposals or make a lot of different similar proposals and so on. And we found that this is not usually the case. So usually most of the users, they don't really create a lot of content. In this graph, we can see in each of the tiles how many users have created proposals or created comments. So for example, here we can see users who have created just 2 proposals and 0 comments, or 4 comments and 2 proposals. And we said that most of the users are here. So most of the users, maybe they just create 1 proposal or 1 comment, but not really much more than that. So we cannot really analyze the interaction between users because it's not really very strong, because also probably the platform doesn't facilitate in this chaos of information to find other users. So what we do is we again use this technique of topic modeling to analyze what the user writing about. So for example, if one user is making a comment about bikes, and then another user is making a proposal about bikes, then we can connect these 2 users, because the content of the proposals and comments that they have created is similar. So we can use the same technique that we used before, this topic modeling, but not to organize the proposal, but to organize the users. And that way, we can, for each user, show a list of similar users that maybe they are interested in working together. So that was the third idea. And the fourth part is the summarized comments. In this part of the project, we are just working with the comments of the proposal. Usually we have a lot of comments and we want to summarize the information. We use 2 techniques for that goal. One is what is called term frequency inverse frequency technique. That is a very simple idea. Basically, we look at the frequency of the words in the comments. So when a word is appearing a lot of times, it's very frequent, we think it's an important word in the debate because people are using again and again the word during the debate. So that looks like a relevant word. And we look also in the inverse frequency in the rest of the documents. So if a word is appearing a lot in this debate, but it's also appearing a lot in many other debates, probably just is a common word, so it's not very relevant. But if a word is appearing a lot in this debate, but not in other debates, it's very relevant for this debate. So we should take attention on this word. So this is a very basic idea to select which are the important words and thus which are the important comments that contain the relevant words. It's a very simple idea, but it works very well to select the relevant sentences in the debate and make a summary of which are the important parts of the debate. And we also use another technique. This is what is called the word embeddings, where we previously used a system that has analyzed millions of documents, not in this platform, just in the internet, using newspapers or websites or whatever, analyze millions of documents and understand how words are used together. So which words tend to appear together, have a kind of similar meaning, talking about the same issues. And we use this information in the platform to understand which words are similar. So for example, in this case, maybe the word lane is similar to the word road, for example, even when they are different words, they are talking about the same issue. So we can use this information learned by much larger corpora to detect which words are similar and those are talking about the same issue, to select what are the relevant words. So basically, again, an idea talking about frequencies of words to detect which is the relevant content and then select the relevant parts. Then at the end, after using these different techniques, this is how it looks like the new version of the platform. Here we see a proposal, but now the categories, these tags that define the proposal are automatically produced. So it's produced automatically by the platform looking at just the content of all proposals. We can now show a list of related proposals for each of the proposals, which ones are similar. So when you are deciding if you are interested in a proposal, you can also see other proposal interesting ones to see which one is the best one. We can also connect user. For each user, we can show a list of similar users who maybe could be interested in working together to improve the ideas or to support or make campaigns or whatever. And we can summarize comments. Now, instead of just having the list of comments, we can see here in the top a summary where you briefly can see what people are talking about to decide if getting into more detail into the platform. So now what we do with all this kind of improve, enhanced version of the platform is to test if this really produces an improvement in the interaction of users and how user can interact with information and if the platform is more efficient. That is what now Rob will be explaining.
Thank you, Miguel. So I hope you can see my screen. Okay, so the evaluation was designed to determine if what we call the enhanced version of console actually led to a better user experience. And so to do that, we carried out an experiment, essentially, in which we were comparing the two different versions of console. We recruited some participants, and we had two what we call conditions in the experiment. One condition used the original version of the console platform, condition A, and condition B was the enhanced version of the platform. So these are the independent variables in the experiment. And we gave them a series of tasks to carry out. And we measured a number of different variables or dependent variables that we thought were ways of effective ways of comparing the performance of the users with these two different versions of console. Because the data was in Spanish, of course, that meant that Miguel and I had to go to Madrid to do this. Which of course we managed to do despite this being obviously a bit inconvenient, but fortunately we managed to do it just before COVID struck, so we were quite fortunate in that respect. So the tasks we gave them, the 4 tasks we gave them, were designed around 4 different use cases which we thought captured different ways in which users employ the platform. So the first use case is that a user is looking for one or more proposals they would like to support. To do this, they must choose one or more tags in successive steps until they find at least 3 that are similar, 3 different proposals that are similar to each other. And again, the 2 conditions are the enhanced and the current version of console. Use case 2 was a user wants to find proposals similar to ones that they are given using the related proposals list until they find at least 4 that are similar. And again, there are 2 different conditions here that the participants will use. Third use case, a user wishes to decide which proposal they would like to support by summarizing the comments that others have left. So in this case, there's only one condition, which is using the enhanced version of console. because that's the only one that provides this summarization facility. And finally, use case for a user wants to find people who are like-minded to them, who are interested in supporting the same kinds of proposals. We recruited 14 subjects, and we used a within subjects design, which meant that the subjects all used both conditions, but they're randomized in the order in which they use those two conditions in order to try and eliminate any bias that might otherwise occur. So just to summarize then, the 4 different use cases: tags, related proposals, content summary, and like-minded citizens. And this is typical of what the participants would see in the enhanced version. And here you can see some of the participants actually involved in performing the task in the Media Prado lab in Madrid. Okay, so here we see the results of task 1, where users were asked to find similar proposals using tags that were provided either by the standard version of Console or the enhanced version. So you see we have the mean values for original and enhanced versions, and we measured the time it took people to complete this task, the rating that they gave to the similarity between the proposals that they found that they thought were related, and the ease with which they actually are able to do that. You can see that the enhanced mean is quite a lot lower in terms of time. The similarity is a little bit higher. So they rate the similarity of the proposals found in the enhanced condition a bit higher, and they related the ease with which they found the related proposals also better. Looking at these results, we wanted to determine if they might be statistically significant. In other words, that the differences in the means are not down just to chance. So we use what's called the student t-test, and this gave the following values. So the difference in time is statistically significant at a very high level. The similarity difference, however, wouldn't be regarded as being statistically significant because it's only at the 0.1 level. The ease with which participants rated the task, however, that is statistically significant at the 0.02 level. So some interesting results showing generally a positive effect of using the enhanced version. The task 2, search for proposals using lists of related proposals. Again, we have the original mean and the enhanced mean in terms of time, similarity, and ease. And again, we see a difference between the means, much lower mean in terms of time. So in the enhanced version, participants took a lot less time. They rated the similarity between the proposals that they found somewhat higher, and they also rated it being slightly easier to do that using the enhanced version. And again, applying the t-test to see if these results are indeed statistically significant and not down, therefore likely to chance, we find the p-value for time difference is very, very, very highly statistically significant. The similarity is just on the border, really. If you take 0.05 as being the threshold for statistical significance, which is quite common, it's just over that boundary, but it's quite close. So, you know, almost statistically significant. And ease, again, that was also statistically significant at the 0.02 level. We move on now to summarization of comments. Now here there's only one condition, because there's only one version of Console that provides that. We asked participants to rate the relevance of the comments to the proposals and the ease which they were able to do that. And you see here that we have a relevance rating of 3.11, which is slightly over a neutral rating, and the ease is certainly quite a lot over the neutral value of 2.5. In terms of the standard deviation is quite large in the case of relevance, but a bit lower in the case of ease. Move on finally to searching for similar users. Again, this was only provided in the enhanced version, so we only have the results for that version in this final use case. The mean time was 202 seconds. People rated the similarity of the users that they found to themselves higher than neutral or not similar. And the ease, which they found that they rated that again in a positive direction. If we also asked, by the way, participants to make any general comments about the tasks they performed and the differences they found between the two the two different versions of the console interface. You can see that in task one participant said that you could see that depending on the tag, you could find similar things or not, depending, for example, on how specific was the tag, such as dog park, very specific, versus urbanism, very general. Another comment, sometimes there were too few tags or the tags were too general. Task two, this was much easier compared to the first task and pretty clear, much more easier than the first task, and the proposals were much more related, between them. Task three, we had these comments, for example, the relevance of the extracts changed a lot from one case to another. In some cases, very good, and in some cases, not at all, so indicating some areas for improvement. The extracts were in many cases not very relevant regarding the proposal itself. So again, indicating some areas for improvement. And finally, task four, it was easy and difficulty was similar to the first task. In some cases, when talking about very general issues, it was difficult. In other cases, when talking about very specific issues, it was much easier. And finally, it was difficult to navigate through the list. For example, it could make it easier to show the activity of the user, that is, number of proposals against the number of comments, before entering into her profile. So you could select users also based on that. So some interesting comments there, which we can take forward into considering how to improve the way that the enhanced version produces or presents information to users. So in summary, we can say the following: that searches for similar proposals with enhanced console tags and lists, which is tasks 1 and 2, users perform more quickly, a result which was statistically significant, and users were more satisfied with results and found the task easier. Again, so statistically significant. Summarization of task 3, users marginally satisfied with results found the task very easy, and search for similar users marginally satisfied with results and ease of the task. So we can conclude that the evaluation of the results show that the introduction of NLP and machine learning techniques enabled tasks that were previously not feasible, such as summarization of texts or discovery of users with similar interests, and both were also valued positively by subjects. The results showed that the time required in the task of identifying similar users was similar to that observed for the task of identifying similar proposals when using the enhanced version, and reinforces the conclusion that this new mode of interaction would enhance users' experience of the platform, and the NLP and machine learning techniques enable types of interaction between users and their ideas that were not possible before. So we take away some positive results from the evaluation that support the idea that the tools we've developed, although not perfect, are offering an advance in terms of the features and functionality and the ease of use of the console platform. So I'll now hand over, or shall I just do the slides for you, Jonathan? Okay, Jonathan, you're muted.
Do you want to go over the Goslar example, Rob?
Oh, right. Sorry, yes. You're right, that's me, isn't it? So the results that we've just seen, the evaluation we've just seen, is an experimental evaluation, and there are lots of qualifications about doing experimental evaluations. After all, and first and foremost, it's not the real world. These are artificial situations. So we want to really test the enhanced console version in what we call real world scenarios. and what's sometimes referred to in the world of websites and apps and so forth as beta testing. In other words, we put a prototype out into the real world and we ask users to use it for real tasks. And to do that, we're very pleased that we have a collaboration with the Confederation of Scottish Local Authorities, COSLA, who approached us following a workshop that we did on the project and asked us about deploying our tools in a program of participatory budgeting that they have launched in 2021, in which £100 million of budget will be determined by the proposals put forward by citizens of these 31 Scottish councils. So the enhanced version of Console is in the process of being deployed. And in this way, we hope to gather more information about the effectiveness of the enhanced version, of course, but also identify factors that will generally help in the future deployment of participatory budgeting programs throughout Scotland and indeed we hope in the UK. So I'll now hand on to Jonathan just to briefly expand on that last point.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I've only got one slide. So actually, I want to conclude actually this talk by introducing some more research than my own research, but in doing so, hopefully tie together some of the case studies that we've talked about today. So in recent years, there's obviously been an explosion of these platforms for institutions to use. And with this emergence, we get a variety of overlapping categories and terms. So e-democracy, digital governance, e-participation, e-collaboration, just to name a few. And so this proliferation of terms has meant almost a siloing effect or a fragmentation of knowledge between democratic theory and digital technology itself. So my PhD research involves critically analysing a number of different platforms, including the Console platform used in Madrid and to be used in COSLA, and other platforms such as Decidium in Barcelona and Better Reykjavik in Iceland, in an attempt to sort of reconstruct this divide that we're experiencing and begin to assess the promise of reshaping democratic societies. So to do so, I'm carrying out a longitudinal analysis, which is repeated observations of the case studies over a certain period of time. And this includes desk-based research and interviews with key stakeholders to explore the sort of social and political context which will emerge over time. So there are obviously sort of discrete individual reasons as why institutions may choose to implement a certain platform, but I feel the underlying or foundational reason is all the same. It's for a better democracy, as the title of the talk suggests. So therefore, I can argue that these technologies are democratic innovations. So these are relatively new institutions or processes that are designed to deepen a citizen's participation in governance and society. So that actually recasts the nature of the relationship between citizens and political bodies. So by recognizing this baseline, a number of areas become apparent across all the case studies, so including the COSLA, including Decide Madrid, which need to be considered. So I'll briefly go through them. So the first is embedding or mainstreaming the process. So this is how to utilize the collective intelligence of a growing crowd to tackle the more complex issues which will inevitably come with it. And a good example of this is the COSLA or the Scottish example, which has grown from a grassroots or community-led process into one which is organized by local authorities. The second is situating the technologies. So where should this process sit in the wider democratic system? So these projects require a strong network of multiple actors to efficiently work, maybe sitting alongside a representative system as well. The third is the incentives for implementation. So engaging with the citizens takes time and resources. So getting officials to agree on these digital innovations will require building sort of a robust evidence base of what works and why. And then the fourth and potentially the most important point, which relates to the third one, is measuring impact. So firstly, sort of how and where is the impact measured? Is it the number of participants? Is it the ease of use? Is it the success of the proposals? And secondly, do certain features or indicators exist across all these case studies, which may explain its success? And I'm conscious of the time, so I'll leave it there, which will hopefully be some good points to consider and a sort of a talking point. So if it's okay with the other speakers, we could move on to questions, if that's okay.
Yeah. So thank you, Jonathan. So we listed here some papers, a couple of which have appeared or are about to appear, and a couple that are under review, some of which touch on some other related work that we're doing in applying machine learning and NLP for, broadly speaking, as we've termed it, for social good. Anyway, so questions. Miguel, Felix, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, I'll quickly unmute. And if Johan wants to quickly jump in as the moderator, Johan is our official representative of the Max Planck Law and Tech Society.
So first of all, many thanks to all of you for this really fascinating and interesting presentation. Felix, you didn't promise too much, so I don't know. Did you introduce the Law Tech Society initiative?
Yeah,
yes, you probably
did. Yeah, briefly.
Okay,
yeah.
so I guess we can really move on with the Q&A, and I would invite all participants of this meeting to ask questions either through the chat function, or please just raise your hand and jump in with questions. So perhaps I would take the first question then. It's about the method and more specifically about the experimental design. So if I understand correctly, you had 14 participants, right, in your experiment. And I was wondering whether you conducted a power analysis, because it seems that even with the within subjects design that you had, it might be difficult actually to get a significant result here. So I was just wondering whether for a given significance level and for a given effect size, you calculated the sample size that you would need actually to make a reliable statistical estimate. And the second question is about the within subjects design. So I was wondering whether the difference between the original version of Console and the enhanced version of Console may be driven by contrast effects, because your subjects were exposed to both versions of Console. I was wondering whether using a between subjects design, your results may have looked different.
That's a good point. I think in a between subjects design, of course, well, we're splitting the 14 up into two groups. And therefore, in terms of the power and the likelihood of finding statistically significant results would be reduced, I think. So we went for the within subjects design because of the numbers of participants that we're able to recruit. We haven't done a power analysis. In terms of the test for significance, we simply used the t-test at this stage. And I think the results of certainly a number of those tests are such that we'd be pretty confident that they are generally statistically significant.
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot. Further questions? I think there is one in the chat. Oh no, that was a thank you.
Rob, if you could stop the presentation so that we can see a little bit more.
So if there is no question, so I don't want to hijack the meeting, but it may trigger other questions. So Felix, when you started your presentation, this all of this reminded me of the large literature on the Condorcet-Jury theorem. And I was wondering to what extent all of these crowdsourcing tools actually also are useful for questions of knowledge. So most of the cases that you actually talked about were cases that spoke to, you know, people's political preferences. Would you like to have this bridge constructed? Would you like to have, you know, would you like us as a city to increase the number of parking slots, etc.? But I was wondering whether the use of these, or how the use of these mechanisms would work in cases where there is a strong information asymmetry, perhaps between citizens and you know, experts. So would you recommend using such a system, for example, when it gets to asking people about, you know, their probability assessment of how likely it is to, you know, get a certain disease, or how likely it is to suffer from secondary effects when using a certain vaccine, for example?
Yeah, I think this is the type of more theoretical kind of research that still needs to be done. And I think you raise a couple of questions, you know, an important set of questions. And one is this question: what type of questions can we ask citizens? Is it any kind of question? Is it questions of morals? Is it factual questions? These are questions that I think are being dealt with quite a bit in the theory of collective intelligence. And then that also relates to issues that Jonathan was talking about, namely the question of how to embed participation in a lawmaking or policymaking process, at which stage of a lawmaking and policy process, with regards to which questions. And so all of that stuff, I think, still needs to be kind of dealt with a little bit more detail. And then there are other more procedural questions that come up with a tool. So, for instance, Miguel was talking about how you can connect different users to with similar views, and in you know, in contrast to what a face-to-face deliberative assembly would do, is that you bring together people who have their own, you know, similar ideas and similar views or similar topics. So there's a risk of siloing this. Then siloing opinions. Then there's another question, for instance, of majority questions of how do you design a democracy? Is it purely only the majority who is going to get the decision in, basically, or get the attention of policymakers? Then there's a question: what is going to happen with representation? So there are loads of questions that are connected, you know, that political theorists or public lawyers will have to deal with if these things are being implemented. And I think that test studies like COSLA are good examples or good kind of test cases to see how are people actually using these tools, and how are political leaders using the results of these tools, and where do these tools sit within a democratic system.
If I may add also a comment about that, when presenting this kind of tool, not only this enhanced version, but in general digital participation platforms, it's usually very common that one of the first reactions have to do with this kind of question, like the possible dangers of these tools, like what happened if we start deciding our vaccines with these tools, or very important expert questions. And all these questions usually have to do with more theoretical dangers that actually in the real scenarios never happen. So they are not happening in these cases when there are governments or institutions taking very complex technical decisions through this platform and then having problems. But even if we look at the most complex decisions that are taken to this platform, for example, I was commenting at the beginning, one of the cases of this platform that are used are for participatory budgeting. In the city of Madrid, for example, the city was opening 100 million euros process every year. So there were 100 million euros that were decided directly by the citizens with no limits. So, and the budget is probably the most complex decision of a city council. So it's the most complex decision that a city government can take, and it was taken directly in this 100 million euros by the citizens. And the efficiency of the results was amazing. That was done 4 years in the city of Madrid. And to compare, for example, and connecting also, for example, with this idea of information asymmetry, before having this process, the city itself, with this amount of money, with the same amount of money, was able to do every year around 30 projects. So the city with their experts were able to carry out 30 projects through the city with this amount of money. When the participatory budgeting started, with the same amount of money, the citizens were able to carry 300 projects. So 10 times more projects through the city happening with the same amount of money. So the efficiency grew a lot because the information was not really in the hands of the small group of experts on the city, was spread through the citizens. So this is one important benefit of these tools, to break this information asymmetry that is not expert versus a non-expert citizens, is versus a small group of very selected group of people who don't have much information of what is really happening through the city and the whole city itself. So usually the real case, not the supposed danger, but the real case usually is really, really positive in terms of efficiency and outcomes.
Could I add as well, just quickly, it reminding me of a phrase that I quite like. I agree with Felix. It's always sort of goes down to the question you want to ask at the start. And there's a phrase where the experts themselves are always citizens. So we can't look at this often as being the sort of the experts and the citizens. If you set up the process correctly, the experts also become the citizens, and they're sort of embedded within the process itself.
In this group, Miguel is the positive guy.
But based on facts, based on data.
Yeah, based purely on
based on this experience of previous platform. Not that I'm just proposing what could happen.
No.
If we look at the cases of platforms and the outcomes, okay, what people decided. Usually, you are impressed with the intelligence of the decisions.
Which is also true for cases like, for instance, in constitution making, where we've seen really, really meaningful submissions of citizens.
Absolutely. This triggered another question, because, I mean, of course, all people you have in your sample are sort of self-selected, right? So these people using those platforms, they usually belong to a group of politically very interested people. Now, I was wondering whether by enhancing user experience, it would be possible actually to sort of incentivize people to use those platforms. And it would be interesting, I think, to conduct this kind of study where you try to evaluate whether the introduction of an enhanced system alters self-selection effects, whether this has an effect not just on the incentives to join such a platform, but also on the composition of the platform, because my hunch would be that in many cases you have a rather homogeneous population using this platform, the very active, the very interested, people who may be affected by certain decisions, and that in a way also creates a bias perhaps between these people and the rest of the population who may also be affected by certain decisions, public decisions, budgeting, but just do not use these platforms. And I was wondering whether this would be an interesting avenue for future research, just to see whether you can actually mobilize the population that you don't observe in the original version of the console tool.
That's a good point, Johan, and we're still scoping out the methodology for the collaboration with COSLA, so we'll take that on board and see to what extent we can perhaps collect evidence about, the demographics of the participants, which may help us to begin to probe those sort of issues. Just by the way, going back to the experimental design, we did randomize the order in which the subjects did the two conditions to eliminate as far as possible any training effects.
Yeah. So yeah. And did you find any order effects? Did you measure them?
We didn't find any order effects, no.
Okay. I mean, I guess in most cases, order effects don't really play a role, but still, I think it's standard practice, right, to randomize the order just to protect yourselves against this potential critique. Yeah, makes sense. Further questions?
There's one coming in.
Yeah, there's one in the chat. How do users register to these platforms?
I think there are probably a range of answers to that, depending upon the context in which they're being deployed. I think we know in the case of the COSLA participatory budgeting exercise, users have to show that they are indeed a registered voter in the particular area that they are submitting proposals for. So whilst they can remain anonymous in terms of perhaps subsequent analysis, they have to be identifiable at the time of registration. For that simple reason that the councils want to be assured that these proposals are coming from people that are within the constituencies of an individual council. I suspect it's quite similar in certain other city level exercises.
I mean, that's in a way interesting, right? Because this may deter some people to use these platforms in the first place, right? Because publicity always carries this risk of generating chilling effects, deterring people from exposing themselves to this kind of public scrutiny, I would say.
Yeah. They can appear as anonymous in terms of the identity that appears alongside a proposal. So they can protect their non-anonymity as far as the process is concerned. Once they've provided proof of their identity to register.
Yeah, and a radically contrary example is the Icelandic constitution making process, which was open to the entire world. So anyone could participate in the constitution making process and say, this is the idea that I have for you in Iceland. And the members of the Constitution Drafting Assembly read it. So that's a totally different conception of how you would design such a process, opening more questions for skeptical political scientists and public lawyers. Yeah.
Further questions?
I think one thing to add is, of course, that the techniques we've been using are advancing very rapidly. And so what was leading edge about a year ago or so when we did most of the technical development, things have moved on since then. So there are new techniques for summarization and so on, which may prove to deliver better quality. So we do face a challenge in trying to keep up with the development of techniques.
That's interesting. And one question I always have in this context is to what extent you test the effect of those improvements. I mean, technically, of course, I can imagine that there's very much going on. But the question then is, if these are systems that are being used by humans, what's the effect, or what's the improvement on, on their user experience? How much more happy are they when using a system that's even, in technical terms, even better than the previous generation? Mm-hmm. Do you have any sense on that?
Well, a lot of people, I suspect, will come to the beta test we were doing. We're completely new to the whole process of direct participation. So they're unlikely to have anything to compare it with, I suspect. What I would add is, I think something that we're keeping increasingly close eye on is the whole question about the trust that people will feel warranted in placing in these systems. What we've developed goes by the name of AI, although I think that's a misleading term to use, quite frankly. But we seem to be saddled with it for some reason. But of course, suspicions are growing about AI and about the fact that it's a black box in many cases, and it's difficult to understand, why am I getting this recommendation, for example, would be a question that people might reasonably want answers to. And they might suspect that someone behind the scenes is trying to bias the whole process by interfering in what people see, for example, in terms of similar proposals or similar people or tags and so forth. So we do have to look, I think, in the future how to make the performance and the behavior of these systems understandable, so that people can see why they've been presented with certain results rather than others. That's a general problem for AI, but obviously it does play in this sort of scenario too. Absolutely,
I think that's a fascinating issue, explainability, and I'm aware that there's a lot of research going on, but to a certain extent, I'm always wondering whether actually we were better able to understand human decisions, and that's, I think, very questionable. I do a lot of behavioral studies, and I'm always surprised by how difficult it is actually to understand the decisions made by humans. And in a way, the promise of AI or machine learning, whatever you might call it, is that you can actually make these systems sort of explainable, and perhaps even explainable in a better way or in a more consistent way than you'd be able to make human decisions explainable.
That's an interesting proposition, Johan, which I hadn't heard before. I think there are a lot of issues around the ways in which people make their behavior accountable to other people. So it depends, I think, your observations depend a lot upon the context in which you're looking at. So I mean, I've looked at how radiologists, for example, make themselves accountable for diagnosing X-rays, and amongst their peers and amongst their colleagues, they do provide accounts of why they're making decisions, which within that particular context are perfectly understandable. Indeed, they design their accounts because they know what counts as an account for someone who has their similar expertise to them. So I'm sure there are examples where it's not so clear, but a lot depends on the context. I guess the big question here is having trust in, having provided the data, citizens having trust in the decisions that are then made about which proposals, for example, get funded. And there, I think it's a matter of accountability on the part of the administrators to show that they can provide evidence that justifies why they've supported proposal A and not proposal B. We trust they've got that sorted out, but we're not absolutely certain. But that's one of the things that in terms of the process and the points that Jonathan was making that we'll be able to study in the COSLA setting?
It needs a clear process from the local authority side, I guess, and sort of education. It relates back to your point on sort of an improvement of the system would also then require sort of training again with the local authority, just to make sure they understand and it's transparent, so they can explain to the citizens and give them the confidence of why a certain thing has gone through.
Yeah, console is only one part of that process, and Jonathan's right. You've got to look at how then the process around it is adapted in order to make the best use of it.
Absolutely. And I think these trust issues ultimately are really important because, you know, trust in a way is of course a mechanism that enables people to reduce complexity and to reduce information asymmetry and to cope with it. And that's probably still a very big difference between humans and machines, because I guess it will be it could be very difficult to establish, you know, good trust or sound systems that enable trust in machines, at least at present, it seems.
Yeah.
There's some work done by the Ada Lovelace Institute in London, who are dealing with questions of accountability and trust and explainability in AI, especially when it comes to public decision making. And I think these were things that we touched upon in the original version of the paper until we cut this bit. Exactly that question: how do you build the framework of developing the AI, implementing the AI in a more holistic way, so that citizens can be expected to trust that process as a legitimate democratic process?
Yeah.
This is a sort of I don't know what you think, a sort of catch-22, where if the process isn't correctly, then there's mistrust exists and builds from a poorly done process of trying to rebuild the trust.
Yeah. And there's an argument, of course, that given the background and given the fact that people are experimenting with deliberative participation or deliberative processes at mass scale as a way of addressing the loss of trust in political processes as currently organized, it would be, I think, a big bet, if you like, that technology alone could solve that loss of trust. There has to be clearly, you know, a restructuring and reorganizing of the ways in which decisions are made around the participatory process in order to really address the underlying problems. So this is just part of the solution, not the solution in itself.
I will have to leave, unfortunately, but you can continue discussing. Johannes, it was great to meet you. I think it's a good group here, and maybe we can continue this dialogue soon again.
Many thanks, Felix, and sorry again for joining in so late.
See you soon.
See you soon, Felix. All right. Well, this was really great. Thank you all for this presentation, and thanks for a very interesting discussion. Hope to stay in touch, actually. So I'm going to closely follow your project and hope to engage with you and exchange ideas.
Great. Thank you very much, Johan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you.
Very much.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.